Hello everyone, I'm Charis Bradford. I compete on the CSUF Forensics team, or Speech and Debate for the Initiated. More specifically, I compete for the speech team, where we perform 3 categories of events. First, limited preparation, in which competitors are given a limited time to write and perform their speech. Second, interpretation, an event similar to acting, which uses a black book. And finally, platform, which is a memorized and performed speech, similar to public speaking. Today, I will be performing a persuasive speech. On December 9, 2018, a Washington Post analysis of 47 major U.S. cities reported 4,484 killings of women during the past decade. About 46% of identifying women died at the hands of an intimate partner. Scary, isn't it? Just imagine meeting someone, hitting it off, devoting your life to them, and suddenly it all changes in the blink of an eye. Due to lockdowns, reports of domestic violence have spiked within the last year. The virus has wreaked an additional havoc on victims who seek help by making it more difficult to access these services. According to public records on February 4, 2021, law enforcement offices have seen an increase in incidents since the start of the pandemic. Requests and reports have increased by almost 2,000 additional report cases in 2020 than in 2019. Domestic violence is a critical social issue to discuss because it has affected a multitude of victims. As human beings, we are vulnerable and we are flesh. Although domestic violence can occur within all genders, identifying women are the ones who are mostly affected by its plague. Today, I will first be discussing how domestic abuse affects identifying women during the pandemic. Next, what is causing the surge in domestic violence reports. And finally, how to help stop the violence. First, let's discuss the problems COVID-19 has created for victims of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. According to BBC News, February 4, 2020, 27-year-old Abby Blake reported, "I didn't know it was abuse until I literally died. When she was almost killed by her abusive husband, she decided to break up with him and press charges." Domestic violence has a tremendous effect on identifying women's lives. It's a terrible crime and is happening every day. DoSomething.org stated April 22, 2018, that every 9 seconds in the U.S., a woman is assaulted or beaten. And about 80% of those women are victims of intimate partner violence and domestic violence. Domestic violence is the leading cause and injury of identifying women. This crime is common and it happens more often to women than you may even know. During the start of the pandemic, New York Times declared hotlines calls were up by 250% on May 5, 2020. Many of these cases involve women not being able to reach out because their partners are in the next room. And with the new face covering enforcement, it is harder to detect the physical abuse that is being inflicted on victims. An article from Prevalence and Trends stated February 5, 2021, that within the past year, it has been almost impossible to detect the number of cases of victims suffering from domestic violence because of the pandemic shutdowns and mask mandates. And as a result, a closed loop of pain, suffering, and violence is created. With that being said, many of the identifying women that are suffering are African American women. According to North Carolina Health News, February 4, 2021, about 40% of African American identifying women will endure experience of domestic violence and intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And per volnet.org in 2021, 53% of African American trans women have experienced some form of intimate partner violence and domestic violence. With the virus present and already having a predisposition for blaming African Americans for being the perpetrator, it makes it even harder for identifying African American women to reach out for help, let alone be considered a victim, because the stereotypes that are set in place. July 13, 2020, article by Institutes for Women stated, Black women were 2.5 times more likely to be murdered by their partners. And with COVID-19, women of color are even at greater risks. African American women are already looked over, deemed as opinionated and strong. So when they cry out for help, most people expect them to be strong enough to make it out on their own. And due to this, victims become discouraged. Now that I have discussed the problems COVID-19 has created for victims of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, let's understand how the pandemic has only added and is continuing to add fuel to the fire. Now I'm going to be discussing how the effects of unemployment caused by COVID-19 has added emotional stresses to our identifying women while they are undergoing being abused. On April 4, 2020, The Guardian stated, COVID-19 cases surged in the United States in March 2020. Stay-at-home orders were put in place, schools closed, and many workers were laid off or told to work from home. These orders can be the cause of an abuser's sudden need to have the upper hand. According to BLS.gov, since the pandemic, the percentage of African American unemployment has increased to approximately 10%, and nearly half of the unemployed are African American identifying women. Unemployment, drug or alcohol abuse, and extreme jealousy are just a few factors which may lead to one's violent outrage. WebMD on August 18, 2020 said, isolation is a big risk factor in intimate partner violence, and COVID-19 increased isolation both physically and socially for many people. It is said that since the rise of COVID, 1 in 5 Americans without a job have been more prone to depression and anger. And as a result, battered identifying women are even more at risk because they become the main target. Due to financial hardships, it created emotional hardships. Many survivors who wish to remain anonymous said their abusers used COVID-19 to aid in their control and abuse. The pandemic has intensified financial complications by causing increased job loss and unemployment amongst African American identifying women. Most of the abused are in financial entanglements with their abusers and are dependent on their share of income or their accounts are combined. For many women who experience domestic abuse and intimate partner violence, the financial involvement with an abusive partner is sometimes too convoluted to sever without an alternative source of economic support. Per BLS.gov, approximately 72% of trans women have been reduced to sex work, which increases the chance of being abused. Situations like these cause sacrifice. This is why many women return to their abusers, and as a result, many abusers feel they have the right to ensure that control due to dependency. As we have discussed the trials and the tribulations that battered identifying women undergo, let's talk about how this can be changed. Let's talk about what we can do to implement this change. A few ways that we can work towards preventing future and current violence would be obtaining and enforcing protective orders and finding an efficient way to ensure that all identifying women will remain safe after they are removed from their abusive partnerships. To set this in motion, I feel as though a special law should be enforced where victims can complete a welfare check from their phones every so often, so law enforcement supports and agencies can stay connected with these survivors of intimate partner violence and domestic violence. And the abusers should be held accountable. They should have to wear ankle monitors, and if they go within a certain range of these victims, they should suffer serious consequences. I also believe that abusers should have to undergo a series of counseling sessions in order to get to the root of the problem, to understand where the abuse of tendencies stream from, to understand why they feel that's okay to hurt people that they love, to understand how we can stop the problem before it spreads to another person and another person's lives get lost. These are just a few of the many ways actually that could potentially set change in motion. Many individuals often feel that just because they aren't a victim, they can't do anything to stop it. But I'm here to tell you that that is not true. Bringing awareness and showing support are great ways to aid in stopping the violence. The hotline.org spreads awareness and helps battered identifying women, as well as support groups like the LA Red Hotline, the Network for our LGBTQ community, and the Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American community. Honestly, Just listening, showing that you care, can go a long way, especially for women who feel like they have nobody while they go through these situations. Universal protection is generally the best strategy in finding social political interventions that target the roots or causes of violence in order to prevent its occurrence. Although domestic violence is known to the public eye and talked about, it does not stop the fact that it's growing and not much is being done about it. November 28, 2020, a 28-year-old woman named Brianna Tierra Johnson lost her life to domestic violence. She was my sister. Her life mattered and it still matters. Losing my sibling was the last thing on my mind, and this has affected not only my family, but it has affected everyone who knew my sister, all the lives that she touched while she was on this earth. And it is my job to make sure her legacy remains strong and still forever carries on. This goes to show that this can happen to any and everyone. This was a wake-up call, and because of this loss, things will be set in motion. I plan to make a change. I plan to say her name and continue saying her name. Today, I went over how domestic violence and intimate partner violence affects African American identifying women during COVID. I then discussed how COVID-19 has added fuel to the fire. And finally, I discussed ways to bring forth change. Many identifying African American women in this world suffer from domestic violence and intimate partner violence. People oftentimes overlook it, and because of this, victims tend to keep to themselves because they are afraid that no one will listen. It is an evil that harms the core of the human race, from very young children to older people. Generations are being affected by its plague. With that being said, it is time to make a change. We are all important. It is important to protect everyone. Long live Brianna Tierra Johnson. Say her name.
Hi, my name is Robert. I compete on the CSUF forensics team, or speech and debate for the uninitiated. More specifically, I compete for the speech team, where we perform 3 different categories of events. Today, I'll be performing a POI, or Program Oral Interpretation, which is a combination of all of the interpretive events. Like a lot of first-year teachers, I tried to mask my inexperience by creating an illusion of authority. My suit said, "Listen up, kids, whatever stunt you pulled last year ain't gonna work on me." I just prayed teenagers can't smell fear. They told me the value of the classroom would be exponential. Education is the essential because that's just how it's always been. But how do we teach our children standards when the standard of education is so substandard? All right, I have a huge announcement I'm so excited to share. Oh, you can't. Well, my headphones are plugged in. You can't hear me still. Hello? Hello? Can anyone hear me? First I was afraid, I was petrified, kept thinking I could never teach through Canvas all the time. Dear heartless overlords of Hades, to say that this year has been taxing on me would be like saying Godzilla has been a minor nuisance to Tokyo. Take a moment and get comfortable, and take a seat in a tiny chair. Remember to wipe down the tiny chair when you're done with this meditation. Feel the weight of your body on the tiny chair. Remove your face shield, close your eyes, and let go. Let go completely. New York Times, December 3rd, 2020 explains, The coronavirus has upended learning in the country's 130,000 schools and glossed over how emotionally and physically draining pandemic teaching has become for the educators themselves. Teachers are on a breaking point. It's the lack of support from the administration. It's the constant barrage of criticism from students, faculty, parents, news. It's not knowing what to do with the stress, the burnout, the fact that we can't do anything for students who don't have a healthy home environment. This program seeks to explore the experiences of those who've been pushed to their breaking point time and time again. Teachers need a chance to breathe before COVID may not let them. Using the dramas, teachers share challenges of coping amid the pandemic by Cornelius Minor. Things You Only Say When Remote Teaching by Bored Teachers. Being an Educator During the Pandemic by Gary Brooks. A Teacher's Resignation Letter by Devin Seibold. Excerpts from Warm Bodies. Poetries, I Will Survive by Michael Bruning. Education by Bella Piera. The First Day of School by Matthew Foley. Prose, collections from McSweeney's Internet Tendency. A program. Because teachers are people first. In your punching bag, never. What am I doing with my life? I'm so pale. I should get out more. Why can't I connect with people? I have a hard time piecing together how this whole apocalypse thing happened. It doesn't really matter. This is what we are now. This is a typical day for me. Shuffle around. Must have been so much better before, when everyone could just enjoy each other's company. This year in English, we will study literature that ignites our imagination. We will learn to pour our soul onto the page using nothing but a pen and our guts. I was so high, y'all, on educational passion, like I had the mainline pure, uncut dead poets society. I was gonna change the world. It's funny. I became an English teacher because I loved words. That day as a teacher left me without them. Much like my line of questioning in a Zoom class, I expect this letter to go largely ignored and for my own self-amusement. While hybrid teaching has been fun, I found a job as human chum for the SeaWorld shark exhibit that I find more enjoyable and, ironically, still more safe. Go now, go. Leave me alone. I've got to figure out just how to lecture using Panopto. They gave me 2 days to adjust, to move everything online. Did you think I'd crumble? Do you think I'd lay down and die? Our school has been virtually shut down, save for the essential staff, such as the finance department, the volunteers that feed the feral cats on campus, and the occasional faculty member who wanders onto the grounds looking for a sense of a connection to a past he once had in order to fight feeling completely untethered during this pandemic. I'm not saying that person is me. People ask all the time what our education is like these days with all this craziness going on. So let me tell you what it's like to be an educator these days. I am alone. I'm lost. This is my best friend. By best friend, I mean that we occasionally grunt and stare awkwardly at each other. Days pass this way. Sometimes we find actual words. Words like Zoom. It's always a delight to see a black box log on with its 3 dancing dots, struggling to find a connection. Any connection, spiritual, emotional, physical, in this dark void that is the new classroom. They say those who cannot teach do, but they never tried because teaching is never just teaching. Our educators get up in the morning. They fix breakfast, they start thinking about all the children in their classrooms who don't have breakfast because, see, we feed 150 to 500 students breakfast every morning. And so we start getting stressed about that. And I know we're giving them some cereal on Monday, but is that going to get them to their next Monday? I've completed the required paperwork and would gladly turn it into the local offices if they were not closed for the same fear of COVID that you forced us back into. Inhale and exhale. Focus on your breath. Be grateful you can take a full breath. And inhale and exhale. Good job. You're still teaching these things to 5-year-olds. Somehow. We start thinking about our struggling students. See, we've got students that are 1 to 4 years behind in their English and their math. We were working so close to close that gap between them and the students on grade level. But that gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger because we can't be there to help them. Let me tell you what our educators are most stressed about these days. They say those who cannot do teach, but they never tried, because teaching is never just teaching. It is the basic reminder that you are more than smart, that together we're able to take this whole system apart, that the core and the standards are but one part, because there's no standardized test to measure heart. If they paid us nothing, I would teach. If the books were all burned or banned, I would teach. I welcome them to the door and teach them the distance between the stars is nothing compared to the size of your potential. Change this world with only a pen and your guts. I am a teacher. It is my job. It is my calling. There is nothing I would rather be. Breathe in. Breathe out. Attend to any sensations you might be feeling. If you notice your mind wandering off at any point, remember that school won't always be like this. Hopefully. Almost every day since March has been like this. First, it was the terror of COVID-19 itself and the massive loss of life. And it was the reality that in the eyes of the state, not all of our lives matter. And now it's this. That the very democracy upon which our education rests, upon which our nation rests, is not just being questioned by folks, but attacked by folks. Every day. Teaching feels incredibly heavy. Then gently bring your attention back to the body and to the breath that you can still take. Inhale and exhale.
Hi, my name is Matthew Allengog. I'm on the Cal State Fullerton speech team. I've done this for about 4 years in high school and almost 2 years here at Cal State Fullerton. The event that I'm going to do today is impromptu. It's super fun. It sounds really intimidating at first, but it's really easy once you get used to it. Basically, you get a quotation and you have to turn that quotation into a speech, and you have about 1 minute 30 seconds to 2 minutes to do so, and then you give a 5-minute speech or 5 minute and 30-second speech. You basically have 7 minutes of time, and you could allocate however much you want of that time to your prep. And yeah, you basically use different examples and different rhetoric in order to create a speech off of the basis of the quotation. And yeah, Colette is going to put the quotation in the chat, and I'm gonna look at it, and then I'm gonna prep myself, and she's gonna give me verbals so I know how much time I got left for preparation. And yeah. There is an episode of Master Chef where a chef has a dish that Gordon Ramsay doesn't like, and Gordon gives him negative feedback because of this. And because of this negative feedback, said chef decides to attempt to fight Gordon Ramsay. And obviously we know that fighting Gordon Ramsay wouldn't end up very well. Gordon Ramsay is one of the most qualified chefs in the world. And despite this chef wanted to go against his negative feedback and wanted Gordon to change his mind, which obviously it didn't work out very well. And this leads into the quotation that I had received today. I need you to tell me that I am a good person, from BoJack Horseman. And I interpret this quotation to mean that we often seek validation. However, this has negative implications. And I interpret this, and I agree with this quotation and this interpretation. And I'm going to analyze it through three main facets of analysis. Firstly, I'm going to look at an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. Secondly, I'm going to look at validation in psychology. And thirdly, I'm going to look at the book Catcher in the Rye. Now, firstly, there's an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants where Patrick Star gets a job at the Krusty Krab. And because of this, he was filled with so much excitement that every single time he had the hat put on him, he would faceplant right onto his face and fall over. And people love this. They laughed at it. And even Mr. Krabs saw this as a financial opportunity and exploited Patrick, putting him on top of crates and making him fall onto pies. And at the very end of the episode, made Patrick climb the top of a very tall ladder and jump from the top of it into a bucket of sea urchins, ultimately harming himself. We can see here that Patrick sought the validation of those around him, so much so that it was obsessive. And he found that this caused very negative implications and even harmed him. At the end of the episode, SpongeBob tells him that you don't need the validation of others or even a job because SpongeBob is there for him and he validates Patrick. Now, secondly, we can look at validation in psychology. Psychologically, humans need some form of validation. We need to feel proud of ourselves and we want to feel secure. A good example of this is a friend who constantly checks his Twitter, his posts, see if they have a lot of likes, retweets, etc. I would know. I'm that friend. Or maybe you have a friend who dates someone else to make an ex jealous. But however, there have been multiple studies that show that this can actually be very harmful and do the opposite of the desired effect. Depending on validation from others can easily create anxiety, depression, and actually create a lower self-esteem than you had in the first place. This is why searching for validation is something that we do. However, it needs a mixture of both validation of ourselves and validation from others. Otherwise, we see these negative implications. Now, lastly, we can look at the book Catcher in the Rye. In the book Catcher in the Rye, we follow a 17-year-old by the name of Holden Caulfield, who finds himself disappointed with the people around him. He is very intelligent and very smart, yet decides to run away from his university and isolate himself. Here we see an example of someone who doesn't seek validation from others at all. And this also is very, very harmful as he goes into a downward spiral. By isolating himself and receiving no validation and no guidance from anyone else, Holden harms himself even more in the end. And we can see that, yes, humans look for validation despite making negative choices, or maybe they don't need that validation at all. However, we still need some form of validation and guidance. Humans are malleable and we don't always know the best course of action when it comes to our own lives. Now, when we go back to the quotation, I need you to tell me I'm a good person, from BoJack Horseman, we see that humans actively look for some form of validation. However, this can still have very negative implications. We looked at this through three main examples. Firstly, we looked at a SpongeBob episode where Patrick enjoyed the validation of others, the laughter of others, and was obsessed with it, and did it to the point where he hurt himself and even his best friend. Secondly, we looked at validation in psychology and how being obsessed with the validation of others can be harmful to the mind, creating negative mental issues for ourselves. And lastly, we looked at Catcher in the Rye, where Holden Caulfield isolates himself, not needing or wanting validation from others, but in the end, seeing how harmful this can be to his mental health and going into a downward spiral where he needed forms of guidance or validation and didn't seek for such. Now, when we go back to Gordon Ramsay and the chef that wanted to fight him because of this negative feedback, we see that we don't always need validation from others, that we shouldn't be obsessed with the approval of others, and rather work to improve ourselves. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my speech today, it is that you don't need the validation from others.
Hi everyone, my name is Wendy. I am a first year and I'm a geology major.
Hi, my name is Nate. I am an HCOM major and a poli-sci minor. I am a third year. I have transferred over from Cypress College.
Hi, my name is Max. I'm a freshman and I'm a political science major.
Hey, my name is Nushan. I'm a second year student here at Fullerton. I'm majoring in psychology and I'm minoring in human communications.
Hello, my name is Esme. I'm a third year transferred from Fullerton College and I'm an English major.
Welcome to the 2021 Common presentation brought to you by Cal State Fullerton's forensics team. I'm your moderator, Wendy, and on the affirmative side we have Nathan and Max, and on the negative side we have Esme and Nushan. To start off the debate, the 1AC will start by presenting all their cards, their evidence, that is going to create the foundation of the debate. The affirmative has a burden of proof, which means that they have to prove that their plan is worth passing. In this speech, they will read cards that will establish the current state of affairs, how they will change it, and how the plan passing would be beneficial.
Inherency. The U.S. acknowledges that the Senkakus fall under Article 5 of the Defense Treaty while maintaining ambiguity on whether they consider them to be under Japan's sovereignty. It's from PAN 2017. James Mattis reaffirmed the United States' commitment to defend Japanese territory from attack. Mattis specifically mentioned Article 5 of the U.S.-Japan Mutual Treaty of Cooperation and Security would cover the disputed Senkaku Diaoyu Islands in the East China Sea, which Japan administers but China claims. Article 5 of the U.S.-Japan Treaty commits the United States to defend against aggression for territories under Japanese administration. Obama stated, "We oppose any unilateral attempts to undermine Japan's administration of these islands." The plan is that the United States federal government should amend the Mutual Defense Treaty with Japan to explicitly exclude mutual defense of the Senkaku Islands. Our first advantage is that plan avoids war. The U.S. has lost its ability to influence global policy, and there's nothing we can do to regain what has already been lost. If the U.S. does nothing, it will find itself on a losing side of countless bidding wars with China, which further hurts its reputation. What the U.S. can do is step aside and allow things to take their natural course and avoid war altogether. Holy 20. The COVID-19 pandemic further accelerated the erosion of U.S. hegemony. China increased its influence in the WHO and other global institutions. No amount of military spending can reverse this process, driving the unraveling of U.S. Hegemony. U.S. policymakers can plan for a world after global hegemony if they preserve the core of the American system, and officials can ensure that the United States leads rather than finding itself on the losing side of the new international order. The United States lacks the will and resources to consistently outbid China, and Washington must recognize that the world no longer resembles the historically anomalous period of the 1990s. The unipolar movement has passed, and it isn't coming back. If these tensions are not taken care of, the U.S. and China will go to war. Only our plan will de-escalate tensions between the U.S. and China. This is from the Council of Foreign Relations 2020. Tensions between China and Japan over the contested Senkaku Diaoyu Islands have continued to increase as both countries improve their military capabilities, particularly their radar and missile systems. Each country claims to have an economic rights in an exclusive economic zone, an EEZ, of 200 nautical miles from its coast. And the Chinese and Japanese leaders have refrained from forcibly establishing control over the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands, but actions could result in unintended escalation of hostilities. Military confrontations involve the United States. As mentioned earlier, these tensions spiral out of control. The U.S. struggles to maintain dominance, while China's only option is to forcibly seize control. From Kaplan 19. The chances have increased significantly. This has more to do with the merely famous Thucydides paradigm. It has to do with how emotional the Chinese can get over an issue like Taiwan and how easy it is for incidents and accidents to spiral out of control. Many wars have begun, even though neither side saw it in its interest to start one, and a hot conflict in the Southeast or China Sea will affect the world's financial system much more. What kept the Cold War from going hot was fear of hydrogen bombs that applies much less in this new Cold War. The use of nuclear weapons keeps receding from memories, making policymakers on both sides less terrified than their predecessors, especially since nuclear arsenals have become smaller as well as increasingly tactical. Precision-guided weaponry and potentially massive cyber attacks make great power war now thinkable in a way that it wasn't during the First Cold War. Once war starts, the only thing that is guaranteed is escalation. Both countries have nuclear weapons that would eventually escalate to a point that they feel both forced to use them. The only result with war with China is nuclear war. Allison 17. Even a non-nuclear war conducted mostly at sea in the air could kill thousands of combatants on both sides. The economic impact of such a war would be massive. After just 1 year, an American GDP would decline by up to 10% and Chinese GDP by as much as 35%. Nuclear wars guarantee that both nations are utterly destroyed. The Korean War and Sino-Soviet border conflict taught Chinese strategists not to back down. The most pertinent background conditions are the Thucydides trap and the syndrome where a rising power and ruling power that China and the United States display in full. The Thucydides trap is the severe structural stress caused when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling one. Most contests that fit this pattern have ended badly. While both the United States and China now have nuclear arsenals and that could survive each other's first strike, that still allow for retaliation, neither can be sure that its cyber arsenals would withstand serious cyber assault. This creates a dangerous use it or lose it dynamic in which either side has an incentive to attack. Next is that the plan solved, excluding the Senkakus from the U.S. alliance obligation, walks the tightrope between neo-isolationism and neo-realism. It resists provoking China while still reassuring Japan, Glacier 2011. If Chinese powers were to greatly exceed the U.S. power, the United States will still be able to maintain nuclear forces that would survive any Chinese attack and threaten massive damage and retaliation. Adding U.S. allies raises the question of just how essential these regional alliances in the Pacific are to U.S. security. Protecting U.S. allies in the Asia might require the United States to engage in political skirmishes and military competition that will strain the political relations with China. Our second advantage is that infrastructure spending, and China and Japan's relationship is on the brink. They have the potential to uplift millions of people's living conditions, but U.S. recognition of the Senkakus is what's getting in the way, Pang 19. Economic interdependence has not prevented a number of political disagreements from affecting Sino-Japanese relationships. It shows how limited the effect of economic ties on repairing political discrepancy. The economic effect of long-term political antagonism goes beyond the short-term market reactions. Close economic connections were based on a strong political commitment to maintain a good relationship, but changing geopolitical environment and political ties are weakening. Going on to the next card, it says that Sino-Japanese relations are key to prevent Asian war and are their only relationship, and the relationship is only getting worse because of the Senkakus, CSIS 2018. China and Japan have struggled to forge mutual understanding for generations. Japan's nationalization of the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands has complicated the Chinese-Japanese dynamic and has hindered development of productive bilateral relations. The only thing that we see that has a direct result from this entire situation is increased pressure by the United States is what is driving the unraveling of this relationship.
The cross-examination is done after every constructive speech, which gives the opposing team time to ask questions about the case. Similar to court cases where legal teams get to interrogate someone's witness in order to gain clarity on an argument, or even help lead into their own argument in the next speech.
So what's the impact to the affirmative?
So we have two impacts. The first is the first advantage, which is that we avoid great power war between the US, China, and Japan, which is the thing that is slowly escalating until we get to that point. Once that war happens, we see that it goes nuclear because we have a use it or lose it dynamic as illustrated through the Thucydides paradigm. The second impact would be the economic impact that we see through our second advantage, which is that China and Japan are the leading providers of infrastructure spending in the entire Southeast Asia. And their relationship is being hindered right now because of the United States recognition of the Senkakus. We remove recognition, those two countries can go back to work with each other and increase the spending that they had done before. The only thing that's straining is U.S. recognition.
Okay, and how does the plan solve the affirmative?
Yeah, so as illustrated through that point, we see that the only reason why the relationship is strained between the two countries comes from the United States recognition. There has been kind of tensions in the area for hundreds of thousands of years, but it wasn't until the United States formally recognized that the Senkakus fall under the agreement itself that there was an issue where all of a sudden this escalation to the brink of war. Removing U.S. recognition will remove, one, a nuclear player from the war calculations when it comes to the first advantage, and two, will eliminate the stress that is causing a lack in infrastructure spending in the second.
And why does the United States need to amend the Mutual Defense Treaty?
Because the only reason why there is tension or stress between these two countries comes directly as a result of U.S. recognition of the Senkakus. If you were to draw a line graph of tensions, we'd see that they're relatively steady throughout the hundreds of years that these two countries have had relations until we see United States recognition of Senkakus underneath this defense pact that they have with Japan. And then we start to see the spike and the escalation. We start to see more goading tactics in their maritime policies from both Coast Guards. They're starting to kind of be a little bit more aggressive, spend more time in the area. They're starting to be a little bit more bold in the region, which is why we see this stress coming in the relationship altogether.
Okay, can you describe what a mutual defense treaty is, please?
Yeah, so what a mutual defense treaty is it basically says that if there was to be a skirmish in this region, both parties that are involved in the agreement will come to each other's defense. So if there's something was to pop off in the Senkakus, Japan would be fighting for their own land or for what they believe is their own sovereign land, and the United States will be obliged to enter that conflict as well. So we are mutually tying ourselves to this conflict before it even happens.
The first negative constructive will now start off by responding to the affirmative's case. During the speech, the negative will read a disadvantage in order to prove that by not passing the affirmative's plan, the world will be better off.
Now, Japan will give up no interest in military conflict, Newsham 2020. If the Chinese presence becomes overwhelming, Tokyo may simply cede the area to the PRC. It would complain, of course, but would it shoot, or would it reckon the cost of military confrontation with China would far exceed the value of some rocks? A recently retired JSDF officer unpromptly recently confided his belief that even if the Senkaku Islands are invaded by China, the Japanese government will not choose war. The Japanese would sort of resist, but my own guess is that the only way to remove the Chinese were to shoot, and Japan wouldn't do it. If letting go is what Japan's leaders are thinking of doing, they can't simply publicly declare. For one thing, Japan's public might be outraged. If public opinion polls overwhelmingly negative towards China are anything to go by. Japan and the Senkakus are in a war camp. Japan is not ignoring defense, but it almost seems to be going through the motions, hoping China is somehow frightened off or loses interest. If Japan does not give up the Senkakus, it may simply avoid an immediate problem from Tokyo's perspective, but that wouldn't be the end of China's demands. Secede the Senkakus, and it raises doubts about Chinese reliability and commitments, as well as complicating U.S. and Japanese military operations in the East China Sea and beyond. No China-Japan war, Moss 13. War is very unlikely, even with a more hawkish prime minister. China defeat would be a real possibility. Humiliation is enough to persuade Beijing to prevent war. China's new leader, Xi, does not want conflict with Japan. PLA exercises are merely for show. U.S. involvement is a real enough possibility to give China pause. China favors peaceful solutions to disputes. China would see regional opinion harden against it. This is not what Beijing wants. It seeks to influence regional affairs diplomatically. Escalatory spiral is not likely. Economic interdependence checks war, King 12. Economic connection should not be overlooked. China is Japan's largest trade partner. Japan is China's major source of foreign capital, FDI grown tenfold. Economic independence is set to deepen. Sino-Japanese hot economics, cold politics makes us a poster child for economic interdependence as a source of peace. Economic ties prevent a sour political relations from turning into conflict. Business leaders, politicians, and governments work hard to negotiate agreements. Hot economics will continue to temper cold politics. Japan strengthened free trade with China. There are clear signs despite China's military rise. Japan supported increased economic ties with China. Japan and China use economics to sustain relationship, and they'll continue to do so for many years. China rise causes nuclear war. Thayer and Han 19. China statements proclaiming intent to be aggressive. China is willing to resort to war and global expansion, even a nuclear war to occupy Taiwan. The Xi doctrine legitimizes territorial expansion. A precedent of success will further entice China. Trump shocked the CCP with major steps, shifted the focus of the national security, and identifies China explicitly as its primary rival. Credible commitments to assure allies, nationalistic fervor, and rapid modernization made officers of the PLA overconfident. Half measures further encouraged China's aggressive behavior. The U.S. must respond with greater strength, determination, and vigorous military measures. U.S. hedge good. Engagement prevents a dangerous global environment. U.S. presents it leverage to restrain provocative action. Alliance commitments deter. Expansion absence. America Mearshire forecast dangerous. Multipolar regions replete with prolific and full-scale great power. Europe is vulnerable. The Middle East would intensify security dilemmas. East Asia could destabilize. Defense realism's optimism. Burgeoning research undermines states have preferences for prestige. Empirical studies show that this is the case. Retrenchment will yield crisis instability. One would see regional proxy wars and proliferation cascades. Risk of accidents goes up as the number of nuclear power grows. U.S. engagement preserves peace. The argument that U.S. commitments are unnecessary for peace is countered by a lot of scholarship. The U.S. lowers security competition in the world's key regions, preventing a hothouse atmosphere. By turning against the recognition of the Japanese administration of the Senkakus, China will increase aggression in the region, knowing Japan has no way to defend their claim. Lu 13. The United States has objectively stabilized the security expectations of most countries in the region. The United States has the security situation in East Asia. It pacified Japan. The United States protection prevents Japan from remilitarizing, which in turn has helped mitigate the fears of other countries in the region. The United States military presence in East Asia has long won the approval of a number of countries, as they're worried that Japan and China will acquire regional leadership roles. Restricted Japan's nuclear weapons development. On the issue of territorial disputes between China and its neighbors, the United States either implicitly or explicitly stands with the latter. The United States has prevented the escalation of crisis and spread of conflicts in the region.
So what triggers your dissad? Is it a lack of defense or a lack of trust?
Could you further on your question?
So absent the U.S. deterrence in the SEA, is it a feeling from Japan's standpoint that they either lack trust in the United States now, which is why they would try to militarize or even nuclearize, or is it a absolute lack of defense? So Japan has no defense, which they can respond to China if there is anything, which would lead to the militarization.
Not that they don't have defense, but it's just that there's so much going on between China and Japan that why would Japan go ahead and move forward with war when it could cause so much, like within the economic interdependence of each other? Like, why would they risk that? Why would they go ahead and move forward with the war? It's not that they don't have the militarization to go ahead and move forward with it, but it's just that they wouldn't do it.
Okay. Does Japan have non-nuclear options of defense currently?
Yes, I do believe so.
Okay. And is that a strong enough deterrent to keep China at bay?
One more time?
Is that a strong enough deterrent to keep China at bay?
Well, it all just depends on the relationship between one another and what they decide to go ahead and move forward with. I believe that it is strong enough to keep China from moving forward with war, but it just depends if either or country is willing to go to war, not if their abilities of militarization is strong enough to defend themselves.
Kind of just furthering on that question then, so would absent the United States and the SEA, is Japan strong enough of a kind of perceived threat to China to kind of say, hey, this isn't worth it, we're not going to go to war with you?
So you're asking if China has enough militarization to scare off China? I mean, if Japan has enough to scare off China?
Exactly, yeah.
I do believe so, yes.
Okay, cool. And then the next is that, is the United States the only country that Japan has defense pacts with or security agreements?
I'm not sure if that's the only country, but I know that as of right now, they do have their agreement with them.
Cool. So then my final question would be, would another security agreement help Japan's confidence so that neither country either furthers their militarization or is emboldened?
I think just U.S. having, U.S. hedge is good just because it would put other countries in their place almost. It would show that U.S. has that power and has that upper hand so that other countries don't move forward with war and do things to go against the U.S.
The second affirmative constructive will now extend their case, which their partner has read in the 1AC, and extend evidence in order to help show that their plan is beneficial and that they have met their burden of proof.
Okay, so first off, non-unique. Trump should have triggered the dissad. He was sucking up to Xi while threatening allies across the globe. They should have already felt abandoned. Next, non-unique. Cross-applied Kool-Aid 20 from the 1AC that U.S. hegemony is on the decline because of COVID. This means that we will not be able to continue to deter China through our allied commitments. Next, non-unique. Japan is militarizing right now. New Prime Minister is increasing offensive weapons. This is Reuters 1/12/21. Japan approved a record-high military budget proposal for the 9th consecutive year, includes funding the first stealth fighter. We need to make our defense operations more efficient to correspond to the increasingly severe security environment. Suga is continuing in the controversial footsteps of predecessor Shinzo Abe. Suga's administration is considering training Japan's self-defense forces to strike distant land targets in China. Next turn, cross-supply chain 19, that resolving the Senkaku dispute will allow China and Japan to focus on economic interdependence, which creates an incentive to resolve disputes peacefully. This means Japan won't feel the need to rearm. Next turn, contradictory U.S. positions on the Senkaku Islands ensures miscalculation and conflict. Washington's seemingly contradictory stance on the Senkakus contributes to the risk of misunderstanding and conflict over these islands. And that's Watts 19. Next, turn cross-supply Kaplan 19, that U.S. and China tensions over the Senkaku cause conflict in the status quo. Plan is key to reversing inevitable war between U.S., Japan, and China. Next, turn U.S. backing the Senkakus emboldens Japan and makes their initiation of a crisis highly likely. This is Narang and Meta 19. Dispute over the Senkaku/Diaoyu Islands has rekindled tensions. Strategists called on the U.S. to limit extended nuclear deterrence. Alliance commitments increase the risk of war by emboldening a partner to demand more and an expectation of an ally to come to its aid. Nuclear umbrellas enhance the risk of war by shifting the likely outcome, emboldening a client state to expand demands. Client states entrap patrons into undertaking costly actions. Next, no impact. U.S. checks Japan nuclearization. This is Lu 13. Washington has restricted Japan's nuclear weapons development. Next, U.S. Sino-Senkaku's tensions trigger war. This is Carpenter 20. Daejeon and its affiliated islands have been Chinese territory since ancient times. These are historical facts that cannot be changed. Inflicting damage on America's relations with China is foreign policy folly. Next, East China Sea war goes nuclear. This is O'Hanlon 19. The U.S.-Japan treaties would appear to commit Washington to defense such allied territory. That could lead to a direct war with a nuclear-armed great power. Insisting on prompt liberation of Senkaku Islands after enemy attack could increase the danger of escalation, including to nuclear war. Next, conflict in Asia risks nuclear war and extinction. This is Toon 17. Of the 9 countries known to have nuclear weapons, 6 are located in Asia, and another borders the Pacific Ocean. Continue to pursue relentless programs of nuclear weapons development. Nuclear winter could cause environmental damage that would extend globally. Next, U.S. tensions rising now. Aggressive actions escalate to nuclear war. This is Tikhnovan at 17. Nuclear war cannot be ruled out. War would be disastrous, according to the National Bureau of Asian Research, while 2 nations continue working together to prevent North Korea. An even bigger nuclear conflict is brewing. Next, sites of arsenals guarantees extinction. This is Whitner 11. The U.S. and China possess large numbers of nuclear weapons. An attack by China would immediately slaughter 10 million. Both nations would be reduced to smoldering radioactive wastelands.
So how can we trust that China won't invade if we amend the treaty?
So basically, the reason why China believes they have sovereignty over these islands is because historically they did belong to China. They were stolen from China, and then Japan purchased them from a private seller. So it's kind of the whole thing of like, yes, you purchased the land, but the land is stolen land. So China would have no need to continue going further into Japan. They literally just want the land back that belongs to them.
Okay, and how is it possible to predict the country's actions?
So we can base the actions based on like literally like the very beginning, the first few cards the new cards that I read about the military budget and how this is the 9th consecutive year that it's been increasing. We can see a historic trend, and we can use that knowledge to figure out what's going to happen, and also use the context of past administrations and also this new administration, which is just going back to what happened before. It's basically like the same ruler, just as a different person, and so it's the same administration. We can expect it's going to happen, like the same things are going to happen.
Then why hasn't the impact of your affirmative been triggered yet?
So basically what we're saying is that the reason why it's happening now is because our Kool-Aid 2020 card states that U.S. hedge is on the decline because of COVID. And that's kind of what's causing this whole spiral thing to happen, is that now the U.S. is it's kind of there and like in and out and in and out, instead of just like actually taking a position on like what they're going to do. Whereas if our plan goes into action, like it said, we're walking the tightrope between these two, like keeping our relationship good with China and still reassuring Japan at the same time.
And is there a risk of miscalculation, and what would it be?
So we actually have a card that that talks about the risk of miscalculation.
The risk of miscalculation is nuclear war because we have two nuclear powers at play, the United States and China. If you take away at least one nuclear power, then you're almost guaranteed not to have a nuclear exchange between two countries.
Similar to the second affirmative constructive, the second negative constructive will now extend their arguments on the case and also respond to the two AC's arguments on the disadvantage. They will attempt to argue against the affirmative's impacts and that the negative has more net benefits.
So for their 6 and 9 card, there's no conflict in the status quo of their Kaplan card, and it's not valid. And since, as a valid source, as the war between China is not inevitable, the U.S. and the Caucasus are not triggering war, and their carpenter cards, 2020 is invalid and not credible as the Glacier 2020 on their disad. The plan resists provoking China while at the same time reassuring Japan. According to Glacier, long-scale conventional attacks by China against the U.S. homeland, meanwhile, are virtually impossible because the United States and China are separated by a vast expanse of Pacific Ocean across which it would be difficult to attack, and no foreseeable increase in China's power would be large enough to overcome these twin advantages of defense for the United States. He also states that the overall effect of these conditions is to greatly moderate the security dilemma, both in the United States and China, while we'll be able to maintain high levels of security now and through any potential rise of China to superpower status. This should help Washington and Beijing avoid truly strained geopolitical relations, which should in turn help ensure that security dilemma stays moderate, thereby facilitating cooperation. Then goes on to stating that because of this, it reassures that China and the United States does not want to threaten its security. And what Glacier is stating is that due to the size of the attacks, that would have to take place across a whole body of ocean in order to even touch a piece of land on the United States, making it not only unconventional, but as well as impossible, and making it the possibility of war not inevitable. Both countries would be facing a strain on their economic and natural resources that would both neither desire at all, because of the fact that both countries desire to keep waters calm and tame in order to avoid any strained political relations. Any strained political relations between DC and Beijing. This plan requires both cooperation and reassurance from both countries. And responding to their 7 and 5 card, there's no miscalculation. Not for now. There is little chance of conflict. It is also false that Japan will be emboldened by the backing of the U.S. and the Sakaku dilemma, as their Quran 15 card claims that Japan's defense is enough deterrent and has absolutely no need for the assurance of the United States. Crom stated that the U.S., recognizing the shifting interest with geopolitical landscape of Southeast Asia, has encouraged Japan to increase its defense posture, working harder to move them toward military normalization. Although Japan's pacifist constitution restricts its ability to maintain a standing military, it does allow for creation of self-defense force. While the acquisition of military hardware and the buildup of troops began as a humble undertaking, it has blossomed into a highly advanced military force. Japan's naval capabilities have a high potential to help stifle an increasingly aggressive Chinese military posture, but Prime Minister Abe has taken the necessary steps to fundamentally alter the geopolitical outlook of Japan, as well as the U.S. will play a critical role in ensuring that the shift in Japan's military posture does not occur at a pace that would unwittingly escalate Sino-Japanese tensions. And what this means is that although Japan has a pacifist constitution, due to an increasingly aggressive Chinese political stance, it has taken to creating a self-defense force that is enough deterrent to keep aggressors like China and North Korea at bay with their increasing political aggression, with the help of the United States to make sure that they are growing at a pace that would not increase any aggression and tensions over the Senkaku dilemma with China. And responding to the 8th card, U.S. checking Japan nuclearization is impactful for multiple reasons. Our Luther 13 card states that it is worth emphasizing that regarding the role the United States has played in the East Asian security affairs, we should distinguish between providing a security guarantee protection and stabilizing security expectations. And Lou goes on to state that the former refers to protecting and protected relationship between the security provider and receiver, while the latter does not require this type of relationship between two sides in the security interaction. Although the United States has contributed to Japan's post-war pacifism in at least two interrelated ways, one given its alliance with Washington, Japan is willing to ride cheaply, if not completely free of charge, on the United States for the national security. And two, U.S. protection also prevents Japan from remilitarizing, in turn has helped mitigate fears of countries in the region that Japan would become an aggressor. Washington has restricted Japan's nuclear weapons development in order for Japan's attempt to eliminate limits contained in its so-called peace constitution while seeking autonomy from the United States and its desire to play the leading role in Asia. The United States has also been able to help reduce the worries of other East Asian countries concerning the rapid rise of China. And what Lou is stating is that although Japan has its pacifist constitution in place, it is also slowly normalizing its military in a way that allows for military protection, not just for them, but as well as surrounding regions and countries. The autonomy of U.S. protection is preventing Japan from gaining a too powerful military that gives surrounding regions a sense of assurance and less fear of Japan's possible rise and re-aggression.
So what is on these islands and what's the significance of the islands?
There is fishing and oil resources on those islands.
Okay, so who do they belong to?
Japan.
Okay. So if Japanese defense is strong enough to deter China, then why does removing U.S. deterrence create such an issue?
U.S. deterrence historically has been interacted and invested in it for a long time and has been very necessary.
Okay, so if our plan is just amending the treaty and not completely getting rid of it altogether, then why would such a small change, which is literally just essentially giving the land back to China, why is that going to cause this great scale effect according to your argument?
Well, because even a small change can trigger a big impact, and your small changes are also very vague, and you haven't given a specific and detailed version of what you want to change, and about your amendment either, textual wise.
The first negative rebuttal speech is a 1-R and is the second speech of the negative block. This gives this negative the ability to split the argument between speakers and extend more into arguments that have been made previously.
Cross-supply U.S. hegemony is good because other countries are not able to secede the power that the U.S. has. Thayer and Han 19 from the 1NC shows that China hedge is bad because they are an aggressor. Although there is no war to be fought now, they are willing to go to war and have nuclear weapons to do so. U.S. must maintain hegemony in order to influence all the other countries with their dominance. The affirmative is saying that U.S. hegemony is on decline because of COVID, but there's merely the work of Trump that has brought down the United States. Trump stayed silent during the majority of the past year. With Biden in office now, he is doing all that he can to reverse the damages that Trump has done to bring the nation up again. He's attempting to gain dominance back and maintain alliances with China, all in order to get us out of COVID with a good reputation, which shows good leadership. Nushman 2020 from the 1NC demonstrates that a China-Japan war will not occur because Japan does not feel the need to go to war, even if China takes over the Senkaku Islands. They don't want the people of Japan to panic with the announcement of a war, along with many other reasons. Moss 13 from the 1NC shows that a China-Japan war is very unlikely from happening because either side does not want to start conflict. King 12 from the 1NC says that Japan rely on the economic interdependence from one another. A war would sever this tie economically in one another, and war is not worth doing so. China is Japan's largest trade partner, and Japan is one of China's major sources of foreign capital. The China-Japan interdependence outweighs any cold politics, and the hot economics has showed to already outweigh the cold politics because war is not occurring, and they like to depend on one another economically. Churn King 14, there's no major dispute even going on regarding the Senkaku Islands. Like I said, China is Japan's largest trade partner, and Japan is one of China's major sources of foreign capital. So why would they give up one another as a resource just for a small dispute that Japan doesn't even care largely about? War is not a plausible choice for either China or Japan. Moss 2013. A Sino-Japanese war would be disastrous for both parties. China would suffer as Japanese companies pull out of a new hostile market, depriving up to 5 million Chinese workers of their jobs. Even Xi Jinping looks to double per capita income by 2020. Panic in the globalized economy would further depress both economies and politically destroy the programs of both countries' new leaders. Hot economics outweighs cold politics, West 2020. But since the opening of China in the world economy in 1978, business and economic connections between these two countries have blossomed thanks to their geographic proximity and natural complementaries. China's rising middle class provides a welcome market for Japan, mired in geographic stagnation, while Japan's advanced technology offers many benefits to China, including essential components for companies. The China-Japan relationship is often described as hot economics, cold politics. Trade has increased from 1 billion to 317 billion over the past 45 years and now represents more than 20% of Japan's total trade, even though it has suffered recently from the US administration's trade war and China's slowdown. Japan is also China's third largest trading partner. The China-Japan relationship still has many deep historical scars too, and Japan is concerned that China's military buildup and assertive behavior in the East and South China Seas. The relationship with China has become more important and will likely continue to increase in importance in the decades to come.
The first affirmative rebuttal, or the 1AR, has the job of responding to both the 2AC and the 1NR. And they will use this time to answer arguments one after another. The affirmative has to make sure that they have responded to the disadvantage as well as met the burden of proof.
All right, so responding to their arguments on the U.S. head good argument, we're not arguing that U.S. head is bad, but we're arguing that it's on the decline, and China is on the rise, which creates the power struggle as one tries to replace the other. If we cling on to our hedge, the disease trap takes place and nuclear war impact is triggered. There's no way out. On the war argument, if Japan is capable enough to deter China on their own, then there's no reason for the U.S. to be involved at all, meaning we have no option but to pass a plan. Vote F. The negative argues that if there is no draw-in or even a chance of Japan going to war with China, but the evidence that supports this argument is outdated. The article they use to support their claim that there will be no firing between the two countries come from 2013, 15, and 20, but both countries have drastically changed their maritime policies to explicitly grant permission to fire upon one another. Here's what Japan's law states, is from Cato 21. As China upgraded to quasi-military status on February 1st, Japanese Coast Guard may be able to directly shoot at foreign targets on their way to landing the Japanese territory. The UN Convention of the Law of the Sea permits necessary steps to prevent the passage of ships that threaten their peace and security. Japan believes this to include the use of weapons by its Coast Guard. Direct shots fall within the range of actions permitted under Japanese laws regarding its Coast Guard and police, and are also permissible under international law. China has been integrating its military and civilian sectors and is now capable of issuing orders to individual fishing vessels. This means it could instruct a government ship or fleet of fishing boats to attempt to land on the Senkakus. Regardless of the Japanese response, tensions over the Senkakus are not expected to subside anytime soon. And China's Ministry of National Defense said Monday, activities within Chinese territorial waters are legitimate and undisputed and will continue to be carried out normally. So now we see Japan has explicitly created a law that says we will fire upon you if you are in this area. And China's like, all right, bet we're going to stay in the waters. Next, China has passed their own law, which echoes the same sentiment, fire at will, Japan Times 2021. Recent implementation of Beijing's controversial Coast Guard law explicitly allows the Chinese Coast Guard to use its weapons against foreign ships it sees as illegally entering China's waters, which includes the Senkakus. So we see both countries have the virtually identical laws that are directly causing that flashpoint or that spark that's going to create an initial conflict. And what we see through all of our evidence, that the only thing that is guaranteed is escalation. As for the economic interdependence check war argument, you can see time and time again through both mine and my partner's speech, both my partner's speech and my own speech, that economic ties are weakening as a direct result of U.S. recognition of Senkakus. This is Chang 19. Economic effects from long-term political antagonism goes beyond their short-term market reactions. Those economic connections were based upon strong political commitment to maintain a good relationship, but the changing geopolitical environment and political ties are weakening. The GDP of both countries combined account for 65% of total GDP development, and the Sino-Japanese relationships are critical to economic stability. Sources of conflict such as historical issues and territorial disputes have remained. And we see that one of those territorial disputes is the Senkakus. Forward to the DA response. First, since the entire agreement, except for one minuscule piece, which is an extension not originally included by the original agreement, it is all that is changed by the plan. It does not create a big enough shift in Japan's trust to the point where they actually nuclearize. Second, if China was restrained by the U.S. involvement, we wouldn't see them enacting the policy that allows for them excusing outward aggression, and that makes one thing clear: China is aggressive because of U.S. involvement. So, and also, Japanese defense equals no need for U.S. assurance. This goes on to what we were talking about earlier, where Japan has a Soryu-class submarine, which is among the world's most advanced non-nuclear attack submarines, and the United States has checked Japanese nuclearization from Lu-13, and they've served as the stabilizing factor in Southeast Asia. Onto the case extensions. We see that if tensions are not de-escalated as a direct result of passing a plan, if we do not pass a plan, tensions will continue to stay. And according to Council of Foreign Relations 2020, those tensions lead to accidental firing upon one ship. Compound that with Quran 15, which says that once firing is started, the only thing it is guaranteed is escalation. We see that not only does it escalate to direct war between China and Japan, we include the US in that, and then furthermore, it becomes nuclear as a direct result of US involvement, which is why you should be voting for the affirmative.
In the 2NR, the negative will have one last chance to make their final arguments as well as prove that their disadvantage outweighs the case. This means that their case would be less beneficial than voting for the status quo.
So the affirmative is claiming that China's new law claims for a sentiment to fire at will, when in reality it's contradicting the argument and making it false. China passes law to give Coast Guard power to fire on foreign vessels, demolish structures to disputed war. And in 2021, this claims that the National People's Congress Standing Committee on Friday passed the Coast Guard law that empowers the Coast Guard to use all necessary means to deter threats passed by foreign vessels in waters under China's jurisdiction. It also allows the Coast Guard to launch preemptive strikes without warning of commanders deemed necessary. And this gives the insight that China is not going to be firing at will unless unauthorized foreign vessels are in Chinese jurisdiction, making the affirmative's point invalid and contradicting, as they are not firing at will and continuing on that they are in a biased mindset, as their source is from Japan Times, where a Chinese law may seem like a threat when in reality it's not more like a threat. It's more so a warning to other countries that this law is only meant to act as a deterrent to any foreign threat. In this case, it could be the Senkaku Islands. Their argument is false, and it should not be taken as it does not give accurate information. 2012 to 2021 expended U.S. support for Japan's position. Congressional Research Service 2021. Beijing's actions created pressure on the U.S. officials to show greater support for Japan, such as publicly declaring that unilateral actions by China or Taiwan would not be affected by the U.S. would not affect the U.S. judgment that the territory is controlled by Japan. In its own attempt to address this perceived gap, Congress inserted the FY 2013 National Defense Authorization Act, a resolution stating, among other items, that unilateral actions of a third party will not affect the United States. Acknowledgement of the administration of Japan over the Senkaku Islands. Language in the subsequent years reappeared in a number of bills and resolutions concerning the U.S. interests in the East China Sea. 2013, then Secretary Clinton followed the congressional language stating that we oppose any unilateral actions that would seek to undermine Japanese administration of the islands, during remarks to the press with Japanese foreign minister. And this cancels their claim of the so-called weakening of the allied ties between Japan and the U.S., as in reality, the ties between Japan and the U.S. has continued to build and strengthen over the years, as previously stated by my partner and I in our last speeches, especially on how the U.S. is looking to normalize military in Japan to give them more of an edge to foreign threats.
In this last speech of the debate, the affirmative needs to prove why their plan is beneficial and outweighs the disadvantage.
First, extend the 2AC2 that the DISAD is non-unique because Japan is militarizing now. That's the Reuters evidence for 1221. This evidence gives multiple reasons why Japan is increasing militarization now, which should have triggered their link. First, it cites their recent military budget, which is a record high for the nation and provides funds for things such as stealth fighters. Second, this is the 9th consecutive year that Japan has increased its military budget, which proves that this is an ongoing trend. So the internal link will be triggered eventually. Third, it quotes their cabinet secretary who says the budget is designed to counteract China's growing threat, which is exactly what their link evidence talks about. Fourth, it indicates that the new Prime Minister Suga is taking things up a notch from Abe to counter China by training strike forces' capability of hitting targets in China. All this means the internal link is either empirically denied by Japan's current militarization or inevitable. They try to make an argument that says Japan's military is not strong enough. This evidence clearly counters that point and clearly states that their budget has been increasing for the past 9 years and is including new tactical plans, new tactical forces to counter them. They're also saying Europe is vulnerable to be hurt if this war does happen. But Europe is the one that's going to go and help and aid Japan. in countering this threat from China. Europe is just as advanced with their military and all these things that were listed in that card that they are sending over to Japan in 2021 to help them counter China. Next, Trump's actions should have already sent signals to China that the U.S. is unwilling to work with allies. Trump spent his entire presidency trying to leave NATO back out of alliances with North Korea and recently removed the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord. The DA is non-unique. It should have already happened. The Thucydidean trap justifies what happens when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling one. China is stuck in this trap as it sees the U.S., a global superpower, as an automatic enemy in their pursuit for global dominance. This is the inevitable war at hand. The app is key to reverse this. By the U.S. removing itself from the feud between China and Japan, China loses the grounds on which it views the U.S. as a threat in the first place. Next, extend the 2AC4 that the DISAD has no internal link because Japan is increasing its military ties with Europe's counter China. This evidence is from 3 months ago and cites new efforts by France, Germany, and Britain to send warships, carriers, planes, and amphibious assault crafts to the region specifically to deter China. This evidence quotes high-level European military planners who state that countering China is an expressed concern and they will work closer with Japan to accomplish these goals. Even if their link is true, that they feel abandoned by the U.S., these new relationships with Europe's biggest military powers means that they will not feel the need to militarize, which takes out the internal link to their impacts. In conclusion, voting for affirmative will do multiple things. One, it will help the United States improve their relationship with China by removing themselves from this feud. Two, it still reassures Japan because we're not completely getting rid of the alliance. We're simply just taking ourselves out of the situation that literally does not concern us. And then also, it's encouraging these new relationships between Japan and Europe that are already growing to counter these attacks and these possible dangers that are coming from China. So Japan is reassured by the United States, reassured by these powers in Europe, and reassured by all the weaponry and assistance that they're being given from other countries. In conclusion, vote F.
To conclude this debate, we would like to thank everyone for joining us today for Com Week 2021. Thank you.